2020 Florida Prize has been postponed a year due to the coronavirus pandemic. In anticipation of the upcoming exhibition, we are conducting virtual studio visits with each artist. I'm Hansen, Mulford, curator at the Orlando Museum of Art.
And I am Coralie, Claeysen-Gleyzon, associate curator at the Orlando Museum of Art. So today we will be visiting with photographer Lauren Mitchell. Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
So we wanted to ask you a little bit about your work today, and especially maybe starting with this current situation we're all facing right now. And maybe you could tell us a little bit how the pandemic has been affecting your work and if you've been able to work during this time.
It's definitely been an interesting change. I think one of the things that I noticed that was very interesting is my subjects and a lot of what I photograph kind of has sort of a quality of isolation, even, in the best of times. And so to be in a situation where isolation is now put upon us, I think that's really been an interesting sort of twist. Going out and taking walks around my neighborhood and bringing my camera, I've noticed being very, very mindful of distance and space from people, which I think is interesting considering what I have photographed in the past. And I've also been photographing a lot more at home and in my personal life, which I used to do more when my daughter was smaller. But then I, just by the nature of being at home so much now, this is, what I've been photographing. Obviously, my daughter still factors a lot. She'll definitely be my subject matter no matter what. But I've been photographing her at home. And I have been keeping, this specific time in mind, but just sort of photographing our everyday life. Some of the little strange things that kind of creep in and getting out just a little bit. I live in downtown.
Downtown Orlando.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Downtown Orlando. Yes. And noticing how some of the things are both very similar to, how it used to feel when, back just a few months ago. Things feel very similar and yet they feel very different at the same time. This was like Yola just a few weeks ago. So there is sort of this strange sense of normalcy and yet things are very different all at once.
And what are you using for a camera?
I use a Leica Q.
Okay. Do you always have it with you or you?
Yes. It's right next to me right now. I don't know. Yeah. So it's always within reach.
Are there things that you're looking for or you just take it when you see it kind of thing?
Lately it's definitely been when I see it, I'll take the picture. But if I'm going out, before I would go to certain places that I, maybe thought would have something interesting going on. So there was sort of an intention.
Right.
But at the same time, I never knew exactly what was going to happen. So just having my camera on hand.
We were talking about this photograph is one of the, an earlier picture you took when you were living in Brevard County on the Space Coast.
Yes, this was right down the street from where I used to live. I moved to Florida about, 12 years ago at this point. I moved here for my husband. And my vision of Florida prior to moving down here was just really hot, flat, mosquitoes, theme parks. I didn't really know what the other Florida was other than like visiting my grandmother in this really small town by the St. Johns River. It was just so hot. My great grandmother didn't have air conditioning in her house. And I was, this 12-year-old girl who just wanted to go shop at a mall and I wanted air conditioning and I wanted MTV. Coming to live here, especially to Brevard County, which was really an interesting place to move to. It's sort of like the land that time forgot. You kind of see the way that there was this huge housing boom in the 50s and 60s because of that, the space program and everyone coming to work and to live there. And that slowly eroded over time. And so now what we're left with is, these old decaying suburbs in a lot of the area. The economy had, turned down. Even though the space program is still there, it doesn't necessarily mean that the economy is still there. And so it feels very strange to have this idea that there's this big effort and this big program to go to, places that are so far beyond what we can comprehend. And at the same time, we're sort of stuck here on Earth in this place that is, just slowly decaying. And one of the photographers that I'm very inspired by is William Eggleston. Mm-hmm. The way that he used color, the way that he photographed very mundane things. And I think when I was initially drawn to him when I was younger, I think the appeal was the nostalgia. But for him, when he was photographing them, they were very much rooted in his everyday. Right. And only because of time did it make it nostalgic. And so that I sort of internalized that over time when I was taking pictures. But I also have a background in graphic design. Mm-hmm. And that's what I got my degree in. And so I think that definitely plays a part in my subconscious, the way that I'm thinking about color or composition and things like that. The idea of isolation, like I said, I've thought about that a lot. And now that we're in a place of isolation where, like I said, we have to isolate, I've been thinking about the nature of, especially the suburbs, and the way that isolation sort of happens by design. And also the isolation, emotional isolation, personal isolation, things like that. And just thinking over time of my photographs and the way that isolation has kind of shown itself. Mm-hmm.
Is that your daughter or is that somebody else?
That's my daughter.
Oh, okay.
Yep. It's interesting looking back on some of these images because I think it's true for all of America, but especially Florida. This is a constant place of transition. Things that I photographed a few years ago have been demolished. And this was one of those things where this is no longer there. The building's still there, but the astronauts in the window or whatever exactly these were for are not there anymore. And I'm not sure where they went. I think that's the beauty about photography is being able to freeze that. And I think that no matter what the thought behind it, I think is still true to the area.
This is actually Central Florida, right? Or the Orlando area.
Yeah, I drive. Sometimes you have to take yourself out of being here to realize that, maybe a helicopter landing next to a Burger King in the middle of a busy, area of town is not normal. It's, one of those things that I just think is very, very much Orlando, and catering to the idea of escape and still at the same time situated right next to things that are very ordinary, like the Burger King. I'm drawn to moments when people maybe aren't quite having as great of a time as they imagine or that you imagine that they would have, or like that idea of escape and fantasy and getting away and then getting there and you're just kind of sitting there like these two like staring off, not really interacting, just kind of, but they're still at the same time like making the most of it. I don't know if that's true of other places, but I feel like that's a very American experience. This concept of just chasing after this ideal experience or this best version of yourself that you think that is just around the corner if you just go to this beautiful place or buy this thing or live in this neighborhood. And so those things are very much rooted in my thought process when I'm taking pictures.
So these are the images I was mentioning about Disney and kind of that kind of family experience as well. But these are taken on, I believe the first one was taken on the parking lot as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's, with the cars and everything, it wasn't taken in front of the castle. It was in the parking lot, like it's where there's no shade, it's hot. It's your very first experience of being there.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think this was one of those instances where we started those birds, not intentionally. We were at Hot Dog Heaven, and my daughter threw a French fry at, there was maybe 5 birds, and then suddenly there were many, many birds. So the fact that there's so many birds in the sky, that was our fault. But I think the first thing that struck me was, just how beautiful the light was and how golden it made everything. And then as we were leaving, I was trying to photograph something and I just couldn't get it right. And then as my daughter was, getting into the car, I saw the birds overhead and just the little hot dog looking out. It's sort of like a roadside relic kind of thing. And it, everything sort of came together in that moment.
Are you thinking about new work?
I live right next to Greenwood Cemetery in Orlando, and I've sort of always been interested in cemeteries and the history and everything. But I think it became a space to sort of escape to from crowds. It's very strange to want to escape to a cemetery right now, but it was one of the places that I could, walk just freely around. That was close. You think of death as sort of the great equalizer. At the same time, the design of cemeteries, the history of, how we've treated them, how we've treated certain populations and communities, the way that graves and headstones are designed, how we want to be represented, all of those things I've started to really have an interest in.
Where is this located?
This is in Groveland,
which
takes on, I think for me, additional significance. This is actually where one of the Groveland Four are buried. And, a lot of African-American cemeteries are off the beaten path. Some of them, have been neglected, just lack of funding. This one was in the middle of the woods. It's taken care for by the, family members. Contrast it with Greenwood, which is a very park-like space and was designed that way. And even within Greenwood, it's still segregated. And I think about that a lot too. Sort of death is the great equalizer, and at the same time, these places that are intended for places of, to bury loved ones are still very rooted in things that are very human and still, very segregated by class and race and things like that. I view the present through history. That's always my starting point. I've always, loved learning about the past. And so it's really hard not to think about segregation in Florida and the injustices that have happened. I mean, they still do, but the really, truly shocking things that have happened in our not too distant past here that I personally didn't even know about until recently. And obviously I think that's definitely a privilege to not know about these things and to only learn about them now. But it definitely, for me, it helps to put things into context, into how I see things in Orlando and just around. It's always something that I'm aware of now.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of social content within the images somewhere. But also, I think, beautiful play of, visual paradoxes and sort of lyrical qualities to it, and use of color and design. I think it makes a rich and varied body of work. Well, thank you for spending some time with us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. We'll look forward to seeing your work in person when we have the exhibition next year.
Yep, I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lauren.